Module 8, Issues in Curriculum. Hi, this is Dr. Davis, and it's hard to believe that this is our final session together for ILA 6684, but it is. And in this session, we're going to take a look at some of those topics that must be considered as we develop the curriculum. And they have an impact, and we must resolve that impact, and we must look at them in terms of how do we bring these issues to the forefront, because a curriculum that ignores them is not a curriculum that truly prepares students for the 21st century. So what we're going to look at is several key issues that have a direct bearing on what the students learn and how we can help them access the curriculum of the classroom. Here are the guiding questions that will be used to frame our discussion today, and that is, first, what are the political forces that shape the curriculum? There are forces that represent various agendas within the nation, within the state, within the city, and having an understanding of those forces will help us to see how curriculum has responded to them over the years. Secondly, we're going to look at some societal forces that have a shape on the curriculum and take advantage of issues that are important to society as a whole, and how curriculum must respond to those forces. And then finally, we're going to look at kind of what's significant about these forces, and if there is something significant, what does the school leader do about it? There are many forces that have an impact on the curriculum. I've identified three categories of these forces. Certainly you could find other categories to express them, but these are the common forces that have an impact on the curriculum. So let's start with educational forces. There are two large organizations within the United States that do have an agenda for the schools. One is the NEA, the National Education Association, our local chapter being the Alabama Education Association, and then there is the American Federation of Teachers. American Federation of Teachers is a union, where the NEA is just an association of teachers and leaders. Both of these organizations are fairly liberal in their political views. They really do, I think, have some positive aspects, as they can protect their members and provide resources for their members, especially when it comes to contract negotiation time. That's certainly true of the American Federation of Teachers. The NEA has a strong voice in Washington, D.C. It lobbies for the things that are very important to it. Of course, if you're a member, which most teachers are, a member of the AEA and the NEA, you can see the work that they do. Again, very liberal, so their political stance probably is going to be somewhat at odds with most teachers in the state of Alabama, where the state tends to be fairly conservative. And so they're looking at how to broaden the curriculum to make it more inclusive, to cover issues that are maybe more outside the traditional view of education. So they're going to look at gender issues. They're going to look at equality issues and things of that nature. Then you have the societal forces that shape the curriculum development, and one of the big ones that has been a long time force in education is the debate between creationism and those who believe in evolution. And should creationism be taught in schools as a viable explanation as to how we got here? Or is evolution the only way that we can teach because it's scientific and it's not religious per se? So there's been a great debate between those two camps as to what the curriculum looks like. Business has always had a strong influence on curriculum development because they want to produce workers that they can use in their businesses, and so they want a particular type of graduate from public schools, one that is able to take a job right away. And so business has had a force in it. But then, of course, we have the political issues. Of course, I shouldn't forget the gay pride movement. That is a societal force that has shaped curriculum as well, in that they've dealt with gender issues, and they also have dealt with homosexual issues and equality issues, and now we have the whole transgender bathroom concern. Of course, the current president has eliminated that as a concern, so that I know there's some schools that are breathing a lot easier. So those topics have to be related into the curriculum, and we've been asked to do that. Looking at political forces, of course, we're talking about the parties. You've got the Republican, Democrat, and then the Tea Party. Although the Tea Party is not as strong of a force now as it once was, you have a little bit of that influence on how we can make sure the curriculum is more conservative. These forces have very different agendas and come at education from different directions, and so it can be confusing as to how do we create a curriculum that meets all the needs of these various groups. In many cases we can't, and so then it becomes a tug of war as to whose agenda is going to be represented in the curriculum, and whoever has the most clout, the most political power, is the one that's probably going to have their issues in the curriculum. So curriculum has to be very responsive to these needs, and it becomes a challenge for developers to kind of create a middle of the road curriculum that addresses some, but not maybe leaning too far one way or the other when it comes to how the curriculum is developed. So these are forces to be aware of. While you may not see them in your local area because they typically are national forces, they're not so much locally represented, that it becomes something that we have to be concerned about. But it's something we should be aware of as we're planning the curriculum. Here are some academic initiatives that have been undertaken to augment the curriculum in our public schools. And you'll see a variety of images here on this slide because these have been very noteworthy initiatives. And basically, these initiatives have all been designed or targeted towards meeting the need of a specific area of the curriculum. In other words, they are fixing something that is perceived to be wrong with the curriculum. So let's start at the upper left-hand side of the slide. The Carl D. Perkins Grant. An act. It was a piece of legislation that was focusing on vocational and technical education. It was first passed in the year 2006, and it provided large sums of money to states to develop more up-to-date vocational training programs. And of course now it's college and career readiness standards, so we've kind of blended in vocational with the academic curriculum. So this particular initiative was to provide opportunities for students who were not planning to go on to college and seek a different type of career. These are people who were going to be entering the workforce right after they graduated, and the purpose was to provide them with skills that they would need in order to be successful. Now, Another initiative here we see just below that. This is E.D. Hirsch's work. He was an educational philosopher who wrote several books, I believe more than 20 books, on basically what it was that students needed to learn in the various grade levels. I have a set of his books that address that very topic. What does every kindergartner need to know, first grader, and so forth and so on. And he was extremely concerned about the cultural heritage of the United States. And so he wrote this book that you see on the slide, Books to Build On. These books address the cultural literacy that every student need to have in order to be a member of a democratic society. He had a great influence on how we develop standards in education and what the curriculum should cover. Of course, we all know No Child Left Behind. That had a great impact on learning. Every state had to develop a series of standards, and they had to test according to those standards, and there were penalties if you didn't meet the standards. Of course, No Child Left Behind has been replaced really with the Every Child Achieve Act, and that was a President Obama reauthorization, and it has quite a different focus on education, and it really doesn't talk so much about the things that every student needs to learn, but it does bring Common Core standards to the forefront. And of course, every state, with the exception of just a few, have adopted Common Core standards. Now, this 2000 report by the Secretary of Labor, his report on what work requires of schools. This was the Secretary, and this report was produced by the Secretary's Commission on Achieving Necessary Skills, was a report that I would encourage everybody to read. It's not that long, but it's a worthwhile read because it talks about the kinds of skills that would be needed in the 21st century to be successful, and that every child needed to have these skills. Every young person should have these skills. So that's one of those that I would strongly encourage you to read for sure. Then, of course, we have this particular report here in the upper right-hand corner entitled Tough Choices for Tough Times. Basically, the author of this is the National Center for Education and the Economy. It also is a 2006 report, and this had some impact on the curriculum. Basically, the report starts out with the mantra that we cannot claim to have the best educated workforce in the world anymore because we're not preparing them to be successful in the 21st century. And it talks about how we can reinvent schools to help students to be more successful in the 21st century. And of course, at the bottom right-hand corner, you see the dual enrollment logo there, and that is again also another area that has had an impact on curriculum because it allows students to take advantage of getting 2 credits for the same course, both at that high school level and then at the college level. And students who have taken advantage of dual enrollment on a regular basis reduce the number of hours they have to take in college. And I would encourage any parent to look at dual enrollment as an option. If your system has it, then find out what it takes to get dually enrolled in a course so that they can get credit for both. Because it ultimately saves parents money when their kids, if their kids are planning to go on college, it saves them money for that. So really, these initiatives have had different impacts on the curriculum because, again, they focus on specific areas of the curriculum. What we really see happening with the academic initiatives is we see a pendulum swinging between 2 philosophic ways of thinking. You've got the progressives and you have the essentials. Remember, the progressives are very forward-thinking. They're the ones who are looking at a more liberalized curriculum, a more student-focused curriculum. And the teacher is more of a facilitator, where the essentialists are more the traditional. They want to keep the important things from the past and transmit that information to another generation. So they believe in this cultural heritage and that the past was good, and there are many things from the past that are good that we need to transmit to future generations. The teacher in this more traditional philosophy is the authoritarian, as we've presented already in talking about philosophy. And so academic issues seem to fall within the continuum of progressivism and essentialism. And so these and many others like them are representative of targeted approaches at curriculum development. They see something that's broken, they try to fix it, or something they perceive to not be working, they try to fix it and make it better. A second initiative that has quite an impact on curriculum development has come under the emphasis of offering children more opportunities in schools and providing their parents with some choice. That has been very important in the last 20, 25 years in education. And so we've seen a real growth in alternative schooling. And you can see examples of that here on this particular slide. So that we have seen, first and foremost, the growth of magnet schools throughout the country. It really has dramatically increased since, say, the last 10 years. Every school district, every state, I should say, not every school district, but every state has magnet schools. And of course, these schools are organized around a particular theme. So you have some that are technology schools, and others are theatrical or drama or arts-based schools. This one here is a medical magnet, which I think is very interesting as an option. And of course then you have science-related ones and math-related ones, and pretty much whichever theme is interesting to the kids, they have created magnet schools just for that. And of course that provides kids with an opportunity to study not only the basic curriculum but also focus on a particular area of learning that they're interested in. And of course, many kids who are interested in the medical field as a profession would probably pursue a medical magnet school. Or if they're interested in the arts, then probably an arts-related one or a computer-related one, whichever the case may be. It allows students to get the core content area as well as then a focus in a particular theme of their choice. The other alternative schooling, of course, deals with school choice. And that allows students to go to any school in a district. It's often called open enrollment. So you are not registered for a particular school. You can choose the schools that you want to go to so long as you're willing to provide the transportation to them. We have had some discussions about the issue of vouchers and tax credits for education, which provides another way of allowing kids to go on to the school of their choice. Of course, this was made possible by a Supreme Court case, Pierce v. the Society of Sisters, which said that federal dollars could be used to support private education through the form of vouchers. I think it's just noteworthy that the first state to offer low-income parents vouchers to attend religious schools was in the state of Wisconsin. That happened in 1990. In line with magnet schools, we have charter schools, and I would say now that the law has been amended to allow us to have charter schools in Alabama, I don't think it's going to be much longer that we won't see charter schools. Matter of fact, I have heard recently that Mobile already has a charter school in the works, and so that they were going to start taking kids this fall. Charter schools were really first developed in Minnesota back in the early 90s. But look at these figures here. In 2006, there were 1,500 charter schools, and in 2011, there were over 5,000. And who knows here by 2017 if that number isn't a lot closer to 10,000. Now, within charter schools, you have the for-profit and the nonprofit. Nonprofit is still the largest amount of charter schools, but you have about a third of them that are for-profit. Edison is a company that provides charter schools. They are for-profit. They establish them in communities. They have to meet the requirements that all charter schools have to meet. But they do it for profit. Their schools have been fairly successful, although there have been some noteworthy examples of charter schools that have failed. They're not the only solution to a failing school system or a failing school. They are just an option to it. And like I said, there are some questions about how well these charter schools function. Do they do it any better than the other public schools? Remember that charter schools are public schools, and the jury, I think, is still out on that. I can't say with complete surety that they are doing any better than other public schools. Some are, but then there are those that are not. So I think the jury's still out there on them. But they provide an alternative to another public school for parents who really want that. And really that's what we're looking at as an issue in curriculum is, okay, we have this state-mandated curriculum, but then you have charter schools which are not required to follow it. They can create their own. So certainly that does kind of throw a wrench in trying to provide a homogeneous curriculum that every student has. The final alternative in schooling, of course, is homeschooling. And you look here at the statistics, about 2 million students are in homeschools as of 2010, and that number hasn't changed radically in the intervening 7 years. About 54 million students are in public schools and about 6 million in private. Homeschools are legal in all 50 states. But there are some variations to homeschooling that I should draw your attention to. The first variant of homeschooling is called unschooling. And this is a type of homeschooling where the students focus on their own education. They choose what they are going to study. And it is legal in schools that students are allowed to choose the curriculum that they're going to study. So they could focus their education on one particular area. And that would be what they'd want to do. It's not very common. It is not. So don't think that everybody's doing this. But there are those options where students can tailor their own education. Now there are some broad goals that they do have to achieve that the district sets forth, but they are allowed to focus in their education where it would meet their needs, study the books they want to study. Then there's something called deschoolings. And this is where students kind of cobble together an educational experience from within the community. So they might do art courses at the Cultural Arts Center or at the Wiregrass Museum of Art. They might then participate in an athletic program. They'll join a community soccer league. And then they might do an internship, if they're an older student, with a business, because that's a business they're interested in. So they really cobble together. They put together their own educational system from resources that are found in the community. There is a legal basis for homeschooling, and that comes from Wisconsin v. Yoder, 1972, which said that the state could not compel students to go to school other than they have to be in school, but that school could be at their home or it could be a regular public school. They cannot force them to come to a public school. Obviously, with homeschooling, curriculum varies and the structure also varies. So these are some alternatives that have an impact on curriculum development or how that curriculum is implemented in a school. Bilingual education has historically impacted our schools and impacted curriculum, because it's been a real tenuous situation as to how do we educate children who come to school with little or no English background at all. And basically it is the educating of the English language learner. We know from the statistics that about 20% of the school-age population speak a language other than English at home. The law requires, this is Lau v. Nichols in 1974, requires that English language instruction take place in the school, so they need to be taught English. In 2002, the Academic Achievement Act specified that instead of we doing bilingual education, we teach in two languages, we must develop their English-speaking skills. And the research was very plain on how important it was for kids to have a strong background in English. And so that the schools have kind of done away with bilingual education and focus more on developing English language skills. This is highly controversial, especially in areas where there is a large immigrant population or a large population where English is not the home language. So I'm thinking of places in Florida, down in Miami, the southern part of Florida, Texas, most likely in Arizona, New Mexico, and in Southern California, possibly even in New York, and other areas as well. So bilingual education is very controversial because there's, of course, a concern that these students are not being served well. Certainly there is some ambivalence that people have, saying, wait a minute, this is America, learn the language. And so they don't want to do more to help. They want to make sure everybody comes to school speaking English. Some politicians have pushed an agenda of English-only legislation. That really has not been successful, or I should say at least the results have been mixed. I mean, I think we've had some positives, but mainly negatives at this point. I don't think that making English the only language is necessarily the answer. English immersion programs have had some promising results, and kids do pick the language up very quickly. It's amazing how when they are immersed in English and how quickly they can pick it up. But what really is at the heart of this debate is what kind of country are we going to be? Are we going to be a system, maybe I should not a country, but a system where we are wanting to acculturate everybody that comes in? In other words, they become Americans. When they come here, we want you to shed your ethnic and racial and cultural diversity, and you assimilate into becoming an American. Or are we going to be pluralistic, which says bring your cultural distinctiveness into the country and it will make us stronger? Kind of the Borg, if you're a Star Trekkie, the Borg approach to life, which is you will be assimilated and your diversity will make us stronger. And that's been the pluralistic approach, and why they have advocated then for not pushing an official language for the country, because they want kids to be free to speak a home language and also speak English. So those that are for an official language, you have two groups that seem to really push this. The English First group, obviously, and U.S. English Incorporated. And they believe that every country should have an official language, and that in the United States, English is the language. Everybody needs to learn it because that's how you get to be successful. And on the opposite side, it doesn't surprise us when we see the National Association of Bilingual Education, Center for Equal Opportunity, the American Civil Liberties Union, who are saying, no, we don't need an official language. I think it, and it's my own personal opinion, I think it's crazy that we don't have an official language. And when you go to China, the official language is Chinese. Now, there may be regional dialects, but they have an official language. And if you're going to go to their schools, you're going to speak their language. You're going to learn their language. So I think it's an issue of accommodation. How accommodating are we going to be? Not saying unwelcoming, but how long are we going to allow people to not learn the language and then expect them to be successful in the country? It's not about making them feel welcome as it is helping them to be successful. We don't want them stuck in dead-end jobs because they lack the communication skills to get better jobs. So I think this has been a strong debate, and this has kind of pushed and pulled on the curriculum for many, many years. And I don't see that it's dying down that much. I mean, we haven't heard as much about bilingual education as we have on the English language learning curriculum and helping kids learn the language, and that's most likely the way we're going to see it proceed for the next few years, is to find ways to develop their English language skills rather than kind of putting in those support mechanisms to teach them in their own language and then teach in English as well. Censorship is an issue that doesn't get a lot of attention unless there is a problem, but it is an issue that we need to think about, because every once in a while you will be confronted with this as a school leader. A parent will complain, typically is how it first comes. They'll complain about a reading assignment, they'll complain about a book that's in the library, something along those lines, and all of this is being filtered through this idea of what is really appropriate for kids to be reading and learning. I put a picture here on this slide of Harry Potter because when the Harry Potter books first came out, they were the most challenged books in all of the public school libraries throughout the United States. Most challenged book of the 21st century. And of course, the challenge typically came from very conservative parents who believed the subject matter of the books was inappropriate for kids because it focused on witchcraft, and many parents have a strong view that witchcraft is demonic, it's satanic, and they don't want their kids being exposed to it. Even though the books have a hero and a villain, and the hero wins, and it's good over evil. The fact is that it involved wizards and warlocks and witches and things like that. Parents really poo-pooed the books and said, listen, we don't want these books. Although the books were responsible for a great amount of reading in the schools. Kids chose these books because they liked to read them. And I think stimulated the idea that children should be allowed to choose books to read that they're interested in reading. Now, while you might think that book challenges happen frequently, they really don't. In the 20-year period from 1990 to 2010, there were only 10,000 challenges to books. And now that's not very many. I mean, that seems like about 1,000 or so books a year. It's not even quite that much, but you're not talking about that many books, and especially spread across the country. But still, it is noteworthy that parents are challenging the books. And what really drives their concern is this, and it's the idea of the books have too much violence in them. There maybe is a sexual angle in the story, profanity, poor English. They might promote a philosophy that many parents don't approve of, or they're un-American, and whatever the case may be. So there's a lot of concerns that parents have when they come to challenge a book. I like what Justice Potter Stewart said when it came to this issue of obscenity. He said it's difficult to find, but he says, I know it when I see it. And that, of course, is probably at the root of all censorship, is that while a parent can't necessarily define or determine what is wrong with this particular book, they know that they don't like it when they see it. Is there a legal basis for challenging books in the schools? Well, there really isn't. The closest court case that might relate to censorship, and that's really what is argued when books are challenged. One side is challenging the book because it's got material in it that's inappropriate. The other side is claiming, oh, you're just censoring. Then you're saying all kids can't read the book instead of just saying your kid can't read. And that really is the balance. But there is no court case that we can point to that validates censorship. The only thing we can do is censor student publications. Now, we can do that as a school, and the school has the right to do that. In the Hazelwood versus Kuhlmeyer case in 1988, the school chose to censor the student's article in the school newspaper. And they found it offensive, it was racially divisive, it was inappropriate, and so what ends up happening is the Hazelwood School District said, no way, no how. It went to court, and of course, because it was a school newspaper, they had complete editorial control. But that really is the balance of the censorship issue, is, okay, if a parent doesn't like a particular book, is it right for them to get that book out of school when other parents may not have an issue with the book? And what I've always tried to maintain is the school is not the parent. And therefore, if a parent has a concern about a book, I say, fine, you may have an option of reading something else other than this book. But we are not going to remove the book because other parents do not have a concern, and therefore their rights must be protected as well. And that's really what becomes the problem, is whose rights get support and whose don't. It's a very tricky situation, and it depends on the emotion that comes with it. Sometimes those that are advocates of censoring books, they come with a whole army of people. And it's not just one parent who's concerned, but it's the local pastors, it's the local this, that, and the other group that is coming in to support it, and it can very quickly spin out of control. So this is one of those issues that does ultimately affect curriculum, because parents can be concerned about the state mandated curriculum, and they do have the right to challenge something that's in it if it is considered inappropriate. So this is one of those that you will deal with, I think, maybe not frequently, but you should at least have an understanding of it, because it is going to happen in your career. I didn't think gender would become such an issue when I first created this slide. It is certainly something we need to consider, and the heart of the matter is everyone being treated equitably? But in just the last 2 years, last year, President Obama signed, and it wasn't really an executive order, it was a letter from the Justice Department and the Department of Education that said that schools had to provide bathrooms for the gender the student identified with, not the gender they were born with. So, and it was on a day-by-day basis. So if a student identified with a female gender, they had to be allowed to use the female restroom. Male, and if it's biologically a female who identified with the male gender, they had to be allowed to use the male restroom. And this caused quite a stir. North Carolina, remember, passed a law saying that they did not have to do that they had to identify with the gender that was on their birth certificate. Now, let's face it, we're not talking about a large percentage of the population. We're talking about 0.1% of the population. Maybe, and this is something that I heard Rush Limbaugh saying one time. He said those that are transgender are typically no more than 3% of the homosexual population, and the homosexual population is less than 10% of the general population. So you're talking about an incredibly small number of people. Now President Trump has rescinded that letter, saying that it's the sex you were born, not the sex you identify with, is the bathroom that you must use. But we have done things over the years to try to address these gender issues. This transgender thing is just the most recent attempt, but we, back in the early 70s, 1972 to be exact, we created Title IX in Educational Amendments of the Civil Rights Act, which was designed to look for discrimination between the sexes. And it said that if you have a boys' athletic team, you have to have a girls' athletic team. And they have to have equal opportunity. And we've even seen some girls, go out for the boys' football team and get on the team. So we've tried to make it equitable between the genders. And therefore, how does this affect curriculum, you might ask, is that we have to make sure that our curriculum is examined to ensure this gender equity. We have eliminated many sexist practices in days gone by, long before my time, but in my parents' days, girls took home ec. And boys took industrial arts. They were separate courses. And that was an issue that went on back in the 40s, 50s, and really early 60s. And then in the 70s, with Title IX, they had to combine them so that boys took home ec. I can remember in middle school taking home economics, and one of the things that we had sewing and we did some cooking, but I can remember making a placemat. It was the thing I had to make as one of the projects you had to make. And then there was the industrial arts class that the girls took. We switched, so boys were in, and it wasn't co-ed at the time. It was the boys were in home ec when the girls were in industrial arts, and vice versa. Also, another sexist practice was that the funding of athletics, where boys' teams got more money than the girls' teams. Now, this was always argued that, well, football costs more money than volleyball, and so therefore, we need to spend more money on it because it costs more to operate. But this was an issue that said, no, the funding has to be equal per boy or per girl. When it comes to curriculum, we've seen several books. I have a picture of Failing at Fairness by Myra and David Sadker, and it talks about how that girls really don't get treated the same as boys do in the classroom. Boys tend to dominate the class because either through their interaction or their behavior, they get far more attention than girls. And the Sadker studied this in a number of school classrooms to see this trend that boys tend to get more attention in the classroom. Boys are tended to focus more on mathematics, science, and technology, and they're pushed to do that. And girls were more pushed towards the language arts and foreign language and humanities type courses. Now, I would have been one that went the humanities route. I wasn't interested in math or science or technology to a certain degree, but what they're saying is that we had a gap here. Now, it has been narrowing over the last few years, but still, there is work for us to do in making sure that we're getting more girls into the sciences and mathematics, not only for teaching, but in industry and engineering. We've seen some changes in job roles over the last 50 years. And that's probably where we're seeing the greatest impact, is that no longer are fighter pilots typically men. Women do those jobs. Astronauts are not typically men. Always. We have female astronauts and firefighters and people in the military and truck drivers and so forth and so on. So we're seeing these typically male-dominated professions where we're seeing women join those, and that's great. I think it's fine. Woman wants to be a welder, great. One of my colleagues here at the university had a student when she was teaching in high school, a young lady who wanted to be a welder, and she went to school, learned welding, got her a job at Austal Shipbuilders, down in Mobile, and has been working there for 20 years, I guess, and she makes far more than most people make when it comes to these industrial jobs. I mean, she is very, very well paid as a welder. So gender barriers are coming down, still slowly. They are coming down, and that is going to be an impact on our schools as we look at how do we provide equal access and equal treatment of both boys and girls. Health education is certainly something that is occupying more attention in curriculum these days because we have a balance between the hygiene, the nutrition, and fitness aspect of curriculum, as well as making kids aware of the dangers of drugs, alcohol, and tobacco use. And that really has been what has shown up in the curriculum. And it's really identifying the needs of students as well as the needs of society in this area. And it seems to focus more on the prevention side of the equation than the cure side. We have seen decreases in teen pregnancy because of sex ed classes, and that showing up in the curriculum, as well as the sexually transmitted diseases. We've seen those decrease because, again, there is education on these topics in the curriculum. And because it is a need in society, it's going to show up in the curriculum and needs to show up in the curriculum. We have seen an 8.7% decrease in the use of drugs in the United States, a 51.9% decrease in the number of drinkers in this society, 23.7% decrease in binge drinking, and 6.8% decrease in heavy drinking. So we're seeing some improvement in these problems. Obviously, drug use, alcohol abuse, and tobacco use are problems. They create health issues. And people need to be educated about these concerns. And they show up in the curriculum, and that's why they're there. Because we figure, why try to cure something if we can prevent it? And that seems to be the focus of the curricular issues. This is where a societal need for a healthier society, healthier population, then has a direct bearing on what is in the curriculum, which is why we see it in our PE curriculum, where we're focusing on fitness, hygiene, and nutrition. Obesity is a huge problem here in Alabama, and it's one of those things that we're going to see show up more and more in the curriculum as we look for ways to decrease the weight of our students. Diversity education, multiculturalism is a big part of the curriculum. It has been a big emphasis in the state of Alabama especially. They want every student who pursues a master's degree and now an EDS degree to have a specific course on working with diverse populations. And this is nothing new. We've had these requirements for many years. The question I raise is, are we making any progress in educating our students about different cultures and living and working with diverse populations? I think we have. And when you consider what's motivating this? When you look at 1/3 of our population is a minority, and we're made up of minorities. We're talking about Asians and Hispanics and a variety of other nationalities and ethnicities. We need to be more aware of this, not only because of being sensitive to these populations, but also because what I've said in the past about our working with people from other countries and networking with them. We're going to be more effective if we have a better understanding of these populations. Now, historically, these have been the problems. Our curriculum is predominantly slanted or biased towards white middle-class culture. You see it in the pictures in the textbooks. The topics that are covered tends to be more white middle class. Now, there is a reason for it, and that's simply because it is the dominant race within our society in America. They make up most of the population. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't open the door to other diversities and present their achievements as well. We've seen teaching methods and testing methods that have been slanted towards that white population as well, and maybe a bit discriminatory against other ethnic and racial groups. We have tried to fix the problem by busing kids. Boston bused kids back in the 60s. Of course, it didn't work, but they did bus kids from one side of town to integrate schools. We've desegregated faculties and student populations. We've changed even our methods of discipline to a certain degree. This is something that is an ongoing issue that we need to resolve. In 1967, James Coleman conducted a study of over 600,000 students, and the purpose of his study was to examine the sources of and the extent of inequity and inequality of educational opportunity for the various ethnic groups in the study. And as a result of his study, he found these three things, that the greatest influencers of student achievement, no matter what the ethnicity, was the home environment. If the home environment was focused on education and valued learning, then the students achieved. If the home environment did not value learning and improving oneself, then the student did not do as well. The teacher also had a great influence on the students, and obviously the more effective the teacher was, the more the students achieved, the more they learned. Lastly, the amount of resources that the child was enabled to access, not personal resources, but the resources of the school. More resources meant the achievement was much higher. How did the curriculum respond to that? Well, we found what's called the Africanizing of the curriculum. And what we did is we started putting in more pictures of diverse populations. Not so much changing the content as the appearance of the curriculum, and making it look more like the students who were using the curriculum, and maybe more welcoming of diversity. That was really what the initial response to updating the curriculum. And then, of course, that expanded out into bringing in African American scientists who and sharing their achievements in the curriculum, and the contributions that were made by African American artists and poets and philosophers and things along those lines. The question comes down to this, though: should the curriculum reflect all cultures? More like, and I'm saying here a curriculum of inclusion, everybody's culture comes in, or should it be a melting pot where all these cultures get tossed in the pot, they get melted down, and we create an American culture? It's the salad bowl versus the melting pot, and you saw that on a previous slide. Well, that's a question that has to be answered at at maybe the national level, although I think it also has some bearing at the local level. Do we deal with this locally? Do we deal with it nationally? Well, I suppose it depends on the community where you're at. If there are a high number of people from other cultures, then maybe you would have to deal with it there. But ultimately, it's what should the curriculum look like? I'm more in favor of a melting pot approach. I want to produce Americans, not German Americans or Italian Americans. And I know there are some that would totally disagree with me. I have no problem with my German heritage, but I'm an American, and so I need to reflect what it means to be an American versus a German American. And now my ancestors took more of this focus in their own, and they were the ones who came here. They wanted to be looked at as Americans, not as German Americans living here. So they did everything they could to assimilate. Now others come in and say, no, I want to retain my home culture and still be an American. Well, I know the diversity is great, and I like that, but I also think, too, we need to be Americans, and whatever that may mean, that's what we should strive to do. So I'm more of the melting pot approach, but I wouldn't argue with you that that's the only way. I think there's certainly a measure where the salad bowl approach might be appropriate, too. Privatizing public schools, it has been an issue. It's not a big one now. It has been an issue. It's one that I think is an interesting one, because it asks the question, who can do education better, the government or a private organization, a public business, for sake of discussion? There are those who believe we need to shift away from the governmental school model into a model where private corporations run them. Well, here's why that has come to be. First of all, the public is very dissatisfied with the education their kids are getting. Now, when you look at the Gallup report that comes out every year on education, that survey of parents always rates public schools at a C or below level, not an A or a B. If they were rating it on a scale of A to F, it's a C, average. They are dissatisfied with what goes on in schools. Most parents are satisfied with their own school that their kids go to, but schooling in general, they think not doing a good job. They're angry with the government, and boy did we see that in the Trump election. Very angry with the government and how it runs things and the waste of money that happens. There are regular calls for educational reform, that we need to run the schools like a business and do a better job. If companies were run like schools were run, well, they'd go out of business because they don't produce a high-quality product all of the time. Now, I realize that is directly related to the quality of the materials that the schools have to work with. But still, there is a great deal of waste in schools. And this is from a public perspective, not my perspective, but from the public's perspective. They say that they need to do a better job of administrating schools. Also, they feel that if these schools were run by private concerns, not private schools, but private companies running the school, that they would be freed from the restrictions of state and local control, much like a charter school. And they would then be free to work with the curriculum and develop a curriculum that would meet the needs of the students, and also allow the students to demonstrate what they've learned in a much better way, so that the schools who were successful would get more students. It's that whole free marketplace ideas, where its competition is good, and that's where the charter schools are at right now and why people don't like them. They say that what will happen is all the good kids will go to the charter schools, and what will be left is all the rotten kids, and they will do better than the public schools. I don't think that's going to happen, but still I know that's the fear that many people have. In this privatization model, they're saying privatize all of the schools. And what happens then is those schools who are effective, they have the best teachers, kids will go there, and the other schools will begin to not have enough students and will have to close their doors, and the students will be shifted to these other schools. So that's a reason why they like them. Ultimately, it comes down to this. They believe, those who are in favor of this, believe that we're going to have more efficient administration, because businesses tend to be efficient. If it costs money, they try to do what they can to prevent it from wasting money. Secondly, they believe that achievement will be improved. Lastly, it'll be cheaper to operate. Now, there are 3 companies that already operate public schools, and you can see them here on the right hand side of the slide. You can check out their websites and see what it is that they do. They're already out there. There are some states that already allow private companies to operate public schools, and they're just like a regular public school. It's not it's not a charter school. These are not charter schools here. These are public schools being run by private companies, and I don't know how much better they do than public schools. I think it's about the same, and when it comes to achievement, which is why this has not really caught on nationwide. But it is certainly an issue that I think may come up again. That's why I put it in here. It's something to be aware of, to think about. Is it realistic that private companies could operate schools? I think with this new administration, folks, you better plan on it. He's a businessman. He's not a politician. And who did he hire for Secretary of Education? Somebody who's from the business world. She's not an educator. So I think we may see some of this in the next 4 years. It'd certainly be interesting to watch to see what happens with it. No discussion of forces that are shaping our schools or these forces that are impacting the curriculum would be complete without talking about special education exceptionalities. And here what I'm talking about is the special education side of the house as well as the gifted education side of the house. Now we have the law, IDEA, 2004 I think is the most recent update of it. Or 2008, and I know that you understand this, and this isn't really to talk about the law itself, but understand that how special education goes can have a tremendous impact on the curriculum, especially as we look at this issue of the least restrictive environment, where we're seeing more classes where they're joined together and mainstream classes where students with exceptionalities are brought into the classroom to be exposed to that general ed curriculum. We're seeing more of this in the classes, and it certainly helps the kids out, and it helps them to appreciate kids who come to school with learning and behavior challenges. It's that issue between mainstreaming versus inclusion, and we're seeing I think more mainstreaming as we bring in our special ed teachers to work with that general ed classroom and really define these educational plans so that the children are exposed to that curriculum. What I think though is going to happen in relation to exceptionalities is that instead of doing a heterogeneous group where we have everybody that has the same age in a classroom, I think we're going to group students by their ability. And you're going to be in a class with kids with similar ability. I think that's going to become more common in the 21st century than it is now. It's not very common today. We're still graded and we're still by subject area. But I think as the 21st century goes, we're going to see more kids in classes where they are combined with other kids who have a similar ability. So this is an issue that really does impact how the curriculum is implemented, because again, you have students who may have serious academic deficits and struggle, and the teacher is going to have to provide service to every child. There are no children left behind, even though Every Child Achieve Act is in place. Still, we can't leave any child behind, and this is going to really govern how the curriculum is implemented in the classroom. Well, that really brings us to the end of this short discussion on curriculum impacts from societal, political, and educational forces. Hope you have a great rest of the week, and as always, feel free to contact me should you need anything. Take care.